We are recording. Mr. Shinobi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron. It's a
Thanks for
pleasure to be here.
thanks for being on. Hey, you were the first person that I knew that was uh sort of starting to ring the alarm bell in a way. You were prepping like over a month ago. You were prepping and you were telling people that they should be prepping. And I want to ask. This was back when I wasn't really paying attention to the whole virus. I mean, I knew it was going on, and it was sort of one of these news stories that is sort of happening in the background of my life. And you were telling people to prep, and I want to know what made you come to the realization over a month ago, 2 months ago, maybe even, that you wanted to prep and you to warn people to do that.
Well, it was just kind of a combination of what we were seeing out of China in terms of the virus itself and just how quickly that was taking people in worst case scenarios into an ICU where they just cannot breathe on their own. And then secondly was just the reaction of the Communist Party of China. I mean, you do not just lock down 10 million people, literally start scrubbing every surface on the exterior of a city and welding people into their apartment buildings for something that isn't serious. And I mean, like, one of the earliest things I worried about there was that they were just doing that as an excuse. Like, we can just pretty much, here's an excuse to go round up any dissident or person we don't like in the country, and just it's the virus, and that's why they're gone, or you never heard from them again. But I think at the point we're at now, that's definitively not the case. But it was just like, the worst case that could happen is you buy a bunch of food in excess of what you need, and so you don't have to go to a grocery store for a while. And
Hang
so
on, do
what
you
is
think the numbers we've been getting out of China, like the official case numbers, the death rates, do you trust that? Do you think it's accurate?
No, I think that those numbers are complete horseshit. I think that the infection numbers are probably BS. The death numbers are probably BS. And, like, just looking at Italy, like, I don't think they're at the peak of the curve yet. And they're already in excess of the official declared Chinese deaths, despite the entire population of Italy being a fraction of China's. That makes no sense.
So you think it's much worse?
I do, but I think that there's a lot of situational things to that. Like, there could potentially still be genetic factors that we're not really zeroing in on that make a different population more susceptible on average. The general health of the country, one of the big things I'm worried about in America is that most Americans' health is atrocious. So I think here that there's going to be a very large percentage of people with health problems that would exacerbate this, whereas an otherwise healthy person might just catch this and be fine.
Do you want to make what would your estimates be then? If do you have any? What would be the case for teleview rates, for example?
I mean, it's like, I am very hesitant to kind of make that type of estimate, because the whole issue with this kind of situation right now is any kind of assessment or prediction is being made on data. And the data that we're getting from everywhere, I mean, some governments like China, they're just lying through their teeth. Other places are doing everything they can to be honest, but it's still a shit show. Like, things fall through the cracks because I don't have time to think that I put those numbers in right. I need to go pick which of these three people I can save and which two I'm going to let die. And that is not conducive to gathering accurate data. And then on top of that, we still haven't had the time anywhere really to do an in-depth follow-up on people who recovered. and see, are there any kinds of long-term health effects there? And so I think like the most important thing for people to realize is everybody keeps pointing at different data sets and going, this proves this proves that. Like, no, none of these data sets are really accurate. None of them have a guarantee of integrity. There are going to be margins of error all over the place until well after this is done and we've had the time to sort that out in hindsight.
Maybe this is a dumb question, but I want to ask it anyways. What would be the reason for China to lie about their numbers?
Well, at first, to just save face. Secondly, to try to deal with the situation and not have the whole world start cutting off travel or, essentially flows of money between them. And then after a point, personally, I think because when things were just obviously that bad, I mean, fuck it. Let it become everybody else's problem. And then we recover first. And now they're doing exactly this. You can look how they're sending supplies around and shooting out propaganda everywhere, going, look, we're coming to save the world. Guys, you caused this problem.
Do you think hang on, do you think they got it under control now? Is that part true?
No. I think that they've definitely gotten it tightened down, but to say that there's no new infections, I don't buy that. And I'm starting to seeing whispers and anecdotes, that this is continuing to spread again. Like, I think that they're not in the middle of the shit show that they were a month or so ago, but I don't think by any means that this is over or contained there.
Right. So they're going to be dealing with a second wave, is what you think?
Yeah, I think that that's why they completely closed off the country to all foreigners, is to try to remove any risk of foreign cases being reimported and just deal with what's there.
Right. You're in the United States. You're in the Chicago area. How do you think your government has been dealing with this?
I mean, the Winston Churchill quote comes to mind. You can count on America to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option.
Are you at that point?
I mean, I think we're getting there. Like, it's, I really wish that people would just kind of use common sense, take the precautionary methods, and then we wouldn't need to have this crazy shutdown that's starting to pop up all across the country. But I think we're well past that point.
What is the situation like in Chicago now, for example? Is there a lockdown going on, or are people still out and about? Or
Well, there's still people walking. It's a stay-at-home order, so it's not like a strict curfew. Yet it's just kind of don't go out unless it's an essential trip or you're avoiding people. Although our mayor is, she's kind of been shrieking at people on the news, and they have police posted up along all the beaches now, the bars. I think that it's probably going to slide into more strict curfew and restrictions soon, just because people aren't taking it seriously. Like the last time I went to the store, all the neighbors are still outside clustering in groups like 2 or 3 feet away from each other. You got groups of 20, 30 kids running around, and it's like all of that is still going to cross contaminate and be an infection vector. It, like, yeah, you're not going to work and everything, but hey, all the kids are still hanging out and then going back home. Like, whoever was sick just spread that to whoever wasn't.
yeah, but you mentioned police is also shutting some areas down. You said the beach and something else, I think.
Yeah, they got them sitting out in front of the bars to make sure that none of the bars are open, even though they aren't supposed to, and things like that.
Right. How are Americans dealing with that?
Um, I think honestly that it's a little sliver of people trying to think about this reasonably, and the other half is panicking, and the other half from that is just not taking this seriously at all.
What about the situation in the hospitals? Do you know anything about this? What is that like at this point?
Um, Nothing personally. I know in New York, everybody's been saying that everything's getting swamped, but from my understanding, it's not quite there yet. It's just kind of getting there. I don't think the hospitals here are doing too bad, but it's like I know at least one person who's confirmed infected now, so like it's circulating in the area. I think they actually just declared Chicago a hotspot today or yesterday.
Do you expect it to get much worse since there's still this sort of, like you mentioned, kids still outside, groups of people still hanging out? Do you think it's gonna get really bad in the Chicago area, for example?
I definitely think there's potential. I mean, it really comes down to like the area. Like Chicago is a pretty segregated city. Like, each group or ethnicity roughly, not exactly, like has like the different areas of the city. And so I think there's going to be a lot of different attitudes and a lot of different actions, but at least here in kind of the white suburby area, like nobody's taking this seriously for the most part.
When will they, if ever?
I think when they start knowing people who catch this or who die, like is as harsh as it seems to say, I think there are a decent amount of people in this country who just aren't going to take it seriously until they get to that point personally.
And what then? Do you expect some kind of panic? Do you what's your expectation in that regard?
I think there's some very real potential for some of the worse off areas in big cities to get a little shit showy. Have a I don't think there's going to be mass riots all across the country or anything, but I do think that there are some problem areas where that's a very real possibility.
What does that look like? A little shit showy.
Just looting, not taking what the cops, or if they put National Guard on the ground, say seriously. Like there are some areas in Chicago, I guarantee if they start putting National Guardsmen on street corners or something, people will start taking pot shots out of windows at them.
Yeah. The other thing is so everywhere in the world, people are sort of stocking up. Well, you started early. They're stocking up on food, on toilet paper, on whatever else. And then in the United States, a lot of people are stocking up on guns. That to me sounds like something like if that's thrown into a shit show, little shit show like you mentioned of looting, like that could get ugly or not. Or what do you think?
I mean, I don't think that for the most part, the type of people who would start running out on the street and just shooting at people or robbing them with a gun are the type of people who are buying a gun legally. Like I think though those are the types of guys who already have one and they're not supposed to have one. I think most normal Americans in this country, I think, would be responsible with a gun. They're not going to run out and just go crazy with it.
What do you think about so for example, so I'm from Europe, of course, and there's a lot I can critique about how it's being handled here. One of the things that I kind of feel is maybe a positive is that the government is sort of helping out people who lost their jobs at least for a couple of months, or so they don't end up on the street immediately. What is anything like that going on in the United States? Because I know a lot of people in America don't have a lot of savings. So if they don't have a job, what happens to them? Are they helped in some way or another?
Well, we just passed the CARES Act. That's there's a small business loan program, as well as some corporate aid, and then the aid for individual citizens. But like my thing, it's just like, how do you actually get that money to people? Like a check is going to take forever to get there. Not everybody has a bank account. More importantly, the poorest people in this country who need that money the most are the least likely to have a bank account. And then on the small business loan application for it, I think there's only 5,000 people who work in the agency that handles loan applications for small businesses that'll be handling that.
Hmm.
How are 5,000 people going to process the loan applications for every small business in this country before those problems start causing consequences?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I guess you guys are getting helicopter money now, right?
I mean, that's just what it looks like, at least in a little spurge. But, personally, I'm not even thinking about that until I see a check in my hand. Like, I look at how bureaucracy works in this country, and yeah, the bill was signed, but now all the real work starts. Like, how well are we going to do actually getting that money to people?
Yeah. So getting back to sort of prepping, do you think crucial infrastructure could fail at some point? Is that a concern you have?
Not on a wide level. Um, I am kind of worried about natural disasters, though. Like Florida, the East Coast, hurricane season happens. Some of the middle parts of the country, tornado season comes around. On the West Coast, you have earthquake risks. Like, if a natural disaster happens like that in the middle of a pandemic like this, I mean, that will magnify how bad that is by 100, and things will not just get fixed as fast as they would in a normal situation. So like that I'm worried about, and that I think anybody in an area prone to natural disasters should think about that. But if you not living somewhere with risks like that, I don't think you're going to have to worry about the power or the infrastructure going down.
What kind of second order effects are you concerned about?
Kind of just the geopolitical dominoes that are falling. I mean, like if you look at Kazakhstan, they're one of the biggest wheat exporters in the world. They just stopped exporting their wheat. And I mean, China, like I am really scared of the situation going on between China and the US. They could kill millions of Americans like that just by stopping shipments of medicine. And we could probably kill millions of Chinese like that just by stopping our food exports to them. And like it's that is the thing that really terrifies me, is when this virus spreads and all these supply chains break down and it becomes, what do you have in your country? Countries that don't have the things they need to handle this or just run normally themselves in their country, I am very scared that things are going to get nightmarish there if major countries like China, the US, places in Europe do not continue to think about their needs in terms of exports. Like if this becomes an everyone for themselves situation, then countries not in a good position like that are going to be in for hell on earth.
What would it take to get there? Like, what would a scenario like this require?
I mean, just you crunch the numbers and you're worried if you continue exporting your food that your citizens won't have enough food. And I mean, I'm sorry, my people come first.
So you think even a country like the United States could get into this kind of situation?
If we handle this very poorly and things start becoming fucked up in a domestic sense, yeah. And I mean, not even, I'm with China, I'm not so much worried now that Trump's kind of reached out and stopped the antagonism a bit, and we're starting to see aid coming to America from China. But I was worried for a bit there about that just being done as a political move. Like, fuck you, China.
How big do you think the risk of this escalating is?
I mean, the way I look at it is we're walking down a step or a staircase right now. And each step is exponentially less likely for us to move down to it. But if we do, it's going to be exponentially more fucked up in terms of the dominoes that start falling. And so I think we're kind of just, walking slowly down that step. And it's like, on which step do we kind of get our shit together and turn back around?
What about sort of the financial monetary part of it all, the stock markets tanking? Do you see some kind of could this lead to a currency crisis of the dollar?
I mean, it absolutely could, but I would not be surprised if, ironically, the dollar actually does pretty well, and you actually see a flight into the dollar and other fiat currencies imploding that can't kind of cope with the overall situation. I mean, it's definitely in the cards, and this is definitely an acceleration of all of that coming home to roost. But short term, I could easily see the dollar do very well as other fiat currencies start imploding.
I've heard some people speculate that it could even, like some people think that you mentioned this sort of stairs if you go down, and at some point this could be this whole situation could represent a huge geopolitical shift towards Asia, basically, sort of the end of the Western American empire, and time for Asia to sort of take the reins again. What do you think of that? Is that too much?
I mean, I think it entirely depends on what happens with China. I think if they play this right, then they can absolutely dethrone America and the West, so to say, and kind of take that central spot in the world. But they have to play that exactly right. And if they don't, I think the end result is going to be any country with a brain is going to pull all their critical, excuse me, infrastructure and manufacturing to their own countries. Anything that isn't critical per se, but they still want out of China, they'll probably try to pull out to places like Vietnam or Taiwan or Korea. And I think, if China doesn't play their cards right, um, the cheap labor market that they kind of just profit off of is just going to implode, and people are just going to pick up and leave and go, yeah, the labor cost is cheap, but it's just not worth all the other risks. And if that happens, China is going to economically implode on itself.
So, what do these cards look like? Do you mean they have to play the virus part right, or the economic part right, or the currency war part right? All of it?
The propaganda part, right?
Hmm.
They have to come out on the other side of this and actually have most of the world going, thank you for saving us, China, and not going, hey, this was all your fault. Like, they need the world to still be comfortable having that much supply chain and manufacturing exposure in China.
Hmm. Do you see any role for Bitcoin in all of this?
I mean, yeah, I think that we're going to see a big wake up call in terms of people flooding into Bitcoin. But I'm kind of hesitant to just say, like, this is when hyper Bitcoinization kicks off. Like I said earlier, I think short term the dollar could actually benefit possibly here. And I think everybody is out of their mind if they don't think that physical gold is going to go crazy. I mean, especially if we see a COMEX default and then paper gold kind of sever itself from physical gold. Um, you know, like, everybody is looking around and going, where do I store my wealth right now? A lot of people are going to jump into Bitcoin for the first time because of that. But I think 10 times the amount of people are going to go to gold. Like, anybody who would consider Bitcoin, look at that and realize the learning curve involved. I think a very high percentage of those people are just going to go, I can't handle this right now. Like, I know gold has been around for a while. How do I get gold?
Hmm. All right, you want to close off with a sort of short-term prediction? What do you think the next couple of weeks are going to look like in Chicago, in the United States?
Well, hopefully these trials with hydroxychloroquine actually pan out and we have a workable treatment method. I mean, if that happens and we can actually scale that up, then I think things could look actually pretty positive. But if that doesn't go too well, then I think I think we're in for another few months at least of this getting worse before we actually see a peak in everything.
A few months or longer than that?
I mean, it really comes down to like are we talking about the first wave? Like, do we have effective treatments after that or a workable vaccine? I mean, it's kind of, I've been losing my mind rambling about all this stuff to like people I know, like talking in private, but I've been trying to kind of not run my mouth like a lot of people in public because like we just don't have the data to work with. And I don't think that people should be pushing like certainties when none of us have an actual good data set to work with.
Yeah, well, that's so. I guess I'll ask you that as well. Then, given that we don't have a good data set available, what would be the right, you know, course of action to deal with that? Are you on board with the sort of Nassim Taleb view that better safe than sorry, or do you prefer the sort of um, what you see a lot of governments do, the just first do empirical research and then adjust your policy on that?
Personally, I would prefer governments to not have to get involved for the most part and people just use their damn heads. But with where we're at now, I mean, yeah, I think I am a little bit on the side of caution and be ready to start loosening up and pivoting the other way if the data starts showing that that's what we should be doing. Because it's like, as more data comes in, the bigger picture is going to be accurate. And so we should definitely be cautious, but we should be ready to pivot. If we've kind of overreacted, we should be ready immediately to start shifting over in a way that deals with the problem but doesn't create all this secondary damage.
Yeah. I said 2 questions ago that it would be my last question, but it's my podcast, so I'll just keep asking questions. Do you see some kind of cultural change happen in the United States where people actually do take social distancing seriously, where they wear masks, that sort of these kinds of things? The type of stuff we're seeing in Asian countries. What would it take to see that in the United States, if at all?
I think that will happen when things get really bad, when pretty much everybody knows somebody who has died or is sick through their social graph. And I also think like cultural changes, it's not just the hygiene aspect. I think that on the other side of this, you are going to see people who spent their whole lives screaming about how the government should do this and do that, just go fuck the government with how undeniably incompetent they have demonstrated themselves to be at every level in this.
Yeah. The United States, of course, has a pretty divided uh, political landscape, anyways. There doesn't seem to be a lot of harmony between sort of liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans. Do you think that could be an issue? If shit hits the fan, like how could that play out in some sort of ugly
I
way or maybe a great way? Or
I think it would definitely be an issue with the crazy extremes on both end, but I think when shit gets serious in this country, most people put the bullshit aside and they just go, what the hell do we have to do?
Mhm. All right, I think that actually was my last question. Unless there's something you want to add before we shut this down.
I mean, the only thing I really want to add is, everybody just be personally safe on the individual level to the biggest degree that you practically can. And I mean, this shouldn't be about who was right and who was wrong and who dug their spot in the sand. Like, we're trying to figure out how to handle this with the least amount of damage all around possible. Like, that's where everybody's head should be.
Yeah, what does that look like for you? Do you even get out anymore? And if so, do you wear a mask? And what does your personal safety precautionary lifestyle look like?
I'm pretty much only going to grocery stores or to get things late at night during midnight shifts. I wear a full respirator, like eye sealed goggles. Like I am doing the full paranoid tinfoil hat thing. But you know what I mean? I don't care. What's the worst case? I look silly for a while. I wore a fake yarn beard to a Bitcoin conference. I don't care.
Yeah, I didn't expect otherwise. All right, Shinobi, I thought it was very interesting. Thanks for being on, and I'll see you around.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.